Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Grief Let's Talk About It podcast. You guys know who it is. This is Tony Lynch, and I am the host of this podcast. And yes, we are your number one podcast for bringing you stories around death, dying, and grief, and all the messiness that comes in between it with some amazing people out here who not only walk the walk, but talk the talk and making a difference in people's lives one heartbeat at a time. And of course, if this is your first time tuning in, do me a favor, head on over to their YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification so you'll be notified every time that we drop a new episode. Now, before I bring on my next guest, I would like to say that this is for educational purposes only. So without further ado, guys, help me welcome my next guest, Denby Jane, to the show. Denby, how we doing?
I'm really well, Tony. Nice to meet you, and hello to everybody who's going to be listening and watching today.
Yes, yes, yes. Now, before we get started, do me a favor, introduce yourself. Tell people who you are, where you're from, and about the work that you do.
Sure. I'm in Sydney, Australia, and I've been doing everything from birth doulaing to death doulaing, shamanic practices, yoga, healing, counselling for about 25 years, and mostly working for myself. I've worked in gyms and different clinics, etc., over the years, but at the moment now I'm based looking at my own practice and just expanding that and looking after my parents, which is probably a story that a lot of people can relate to. My dad has cancer and my mum has dementia. So I'm going into that caring. I have been in that caring space for the last year and really having to apply my own skills to my own family and my own life, which I think happens with a lot of us, in the
Yeah.
industry, working in this way.
Well, thank you for what you're doing and for the work that you do, because that, let's get into it. How is it being a caregiver to your parents, and how is that navigating that realm?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's challenging. It's a privilege, of course, because they're 85 and they're my parents and I love them, obviously. But there are lots of challenges that go with that, and lots of new boundaries having to be established, and the family dynamic, not just for me, but the whole family now having to step up and create different roles and fulfill those different roles to make sure that my parents are looked after and they get what they need. So, and then juggling work, of course, juggling
Yeah,
my work, and I have a sister, so her juggling her work responsibilities and her family and my nephews, etc. So it's a whole shift, but it's like, as you well know, Tony, that the village comes back together to look after the elders. we kind of
yeah,
we've forgotten how to do that, I think, in modern white society. Definitely a lot of indigenous cultures still have that those protocols and those practices in place, but yeah, it's some days are easy, I'll be honest, and other days I'm just like, help, get me out of here sometimes.
I could definitely understand that, and being a caregiver, it has its own set of rules and things like that. Now let's go back a little bit because you've done doula work as well, or you still doing doula work. And how did you get into doing doula work?
Yeah, just by accident, I suppose. I used to work in the film industry, Tony, which is kind of funny. I used to be a hair and makeup artist in doing TV commercials and films and magazine work, etc. for almost about 18 years. And then I had a car accident and that shifted everything, and I couldn't work. I couldn't use my hands, my wrists for doing hair and makeup. And so I had a lot of time on my hands when I was healing, and I started doing courses. And I started off doing energy healing courses and Bowen therapy and massage when I could start to use my hands again, and just sort of fell into it that way. So yeah, it was interesting. And when I started doing yoga training, then I had a lot of women, obviously, and men, but mostly women, come to me, and some of them were pregnant, and some of them were wanting to conceive. And so I started training in prenatal yoga, and then that just naturally, led its way to me offering support with all my other counselling skills, etc., to women in that space. So I never trained officially as like a medical type of doula, like a midwife.
Hmm.
I'm more of a spiritual, energetic doula. So I've been to births where I'm there helping to usher in the spirit of the baby and making sure that everything on those sorts of unseen levels are taken care of, which still affects the birth process, because the more embodied you are and the more in that space of love and being very open. And this has nothing to do with religion. It's just about being embodied. Women who have had babies obviously will be able to relate to that. That really helps them
Yeah.
feel confident and connected to themselves and connected to their baby when they're coming through. Um, and then on the other side, of course, being a death doula, or a lot of people call it the end of life care doula now. Death walker is the shamanic term, one of the shamanic terms as well. And that's more of my past, so I tend to use those words. I'm sorry if that's triggering for anybody, but you know, death is death. So
Yeah.
it's the opposite. Obviously, you're ushering a baby in, and you're also ushering, as many will know, when your parents get older, they go back to a very childlike state, especially with dementia, and you feel sometimes that you are looking after a child. And again, my work, my medicine in my family is to help certainly my father and my mum move from this dimension to wherever they want to go as best as I can, and however their soul wants to go as well.
Yeah. Now, how is it the education, you educating people on that aspect of, because I'm in a process of becoming a deaf doula myself because I want to do a lot more work in hospice and working with a lot of more funeral homes to offer that service to a lot of other people as well. But
Yep.
also, you know, the connections, the opportunities to do death cafes, to help normalize
Mm-hmm.
the conversations around death and what does that look like for people. I know for some people it can be a foreign concept of, you know, of asking, hey, what do you want your death to look like, right? And most people I find, and you know, give me your thoughts on this, but most people I find are afraid to talk about that. They think it's such a negative thing to focus on what death looks like,
Yeah.
and not really seeing the other side of it, why we do those things, right? Why we want to normalize conversations and come up with a plan.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is a very big and sensitive topic, and when we get to talking about my book, I don't address those people because I haven't had that life experience. For example, that have been living in war-torn countries or have
Mm,
had extreme abuse and experiences of death like that. That's another no. That's not my my area of expertise. I'm talking about the spiritual process and
mhm.
feeling embodied and empowered in that way. So, I mean, as you know, same with grief too. It's not just grief connected to death, it's grief connected to childhood grief, for example, or
Right,
relationship, lots of different shades of that. So, um, yeah, there's a lot of amazing people out there and a lot of amazing courses and trainings. It really just depends, I suppose, on the individual, what you're looking for. I'm not one to, I used to be, but I'm not one now that follows the system. I've always been a bit of a rebel like that. And at this age now, I'm like, well, I qualify myself through the experiences, the life experiences that I've moved through, the rites of passage that we all move through, which are
right,
our experiences, and that's how we learn, separate to opinion. And then I learn and I share from that. And I was listening to somebody else the other day, Tony, and this other speaker talking, and I was like, that's exactly what I'm like. I don't, I read a lot, obviously, and I'm a great researcher. I've done a lot of that in the last couple of years, especially. But when it comes to energetic work, it seems to be there's two camps really, if you want to even put it that basic, that people either research a lot of stuff and then they get intuitive memories or get triggered intuitively from what they read and research, or people have intuitive information coming through and then they'll go and go, look, oh, I'm just going to check that, and they'll go and Google it or research it, and that will confirm what they were already feeling. And there's no good or bad, right or wrong with that. There's just different
right,
responses in humans, in my experience anyway. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And for me, I get a lot of stuff that just comes to me and I just go, okay, that makes sense in this lifetime, but maybe that thing that just came through, I don't know where that came from. So then I'll go and I'll research and I'll talk to other people and I'll get into all of my my files, etc. And I'll go, oh right, that's where that was coming through. And that it's not to validate and make me feel like, oh wait, yeah, I'm great, but more like, okay, the information that I'm getting is already out there in the collective field, and I'm just picking and drawing on it as I need to deal with this person or this situation or this issue that's coming up.
yeah, I totally agree. And you know, when it comes down to my thoughts on it, you know, and I was going to speak from my own experience, right? So everything that I've learned, I couldn't say where it came from. Now I have a theory, right? That I've done this work before,
Yep.
maybe in multiple past lives. And right now, what it's doing is that it's reaching its full potential. And the reason why I say that is because I've been doing this work 6 years, and it seems as if the knowledge I have, I've been doing it for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. I've had conversations with people, and this is the reason why I love having the podcast and having so many people from so many different walks of life,
Mm,
is because it's like, wow, this makes sense to me
mm,
on a level to where I can't explain, right? And so, when I can allow my mind to go into and the unconscious level, I realize that the wisdom is so vast that I can connect with people from all walks.
mm.
And for me, and I wish, and now I want to share this with other people. This is what I call being able to pivot with other people and their experiences going through trauma and mental health and grief, and being able to walk with them on the level that they need me to be, right, without having to switch too much.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
okay, so yeah, and that's where my experience is basically comes from. I allow myself to explore this vast world of knowledge and wisdom, um, but also allow myself to fail in order so I can get better, right, through those experiences.
Yeah, I love that, Tony. I mean, and yeah, totally. And I'm very similar in that way as well because yeah, sometimes there are things that you just go, "How do I know that?" Or words coming out of your mouth. It's almost like it's not your own words; it's somebody else's. It
Right.
might be your late grandmother's, for example, that you remember as a child, or whatever. But I think the key thing there when you say to pivot is that in my experience and what I've seen with clients and myself over the years is that we're not, and especially as healers too, quote unquote, we're not here to fix anybody because there's nothing actually wrong with anybody. We've just
Right.
moved through these different series of, yes, super intense experiences and also amazing experiences at the other end of the spectrum. So our ability, just as compassionate, empathic humans, which I believe we all are, that's our original seed source, is the village and the carers and the communal beings that we are, is just to sometimes sit there and listen and to witness somebody in their grief or in their joy or whatever without having to get either hooked into it or try to fix it for them, just to support that. Because a lot of people don't feel seen, as I'm sure you've seen and
Mm,
experienced yourself, and
yeah.
it's not safe for them to share how they're feeling. Men, in particular, of course, with societal conditioning and maybe family traumas and just the whole perspective of like you've got to soldier on and men don't cry, all those crazy belief systems that a lot of us have grown up with. That yeah, to be able to respond, witness somebody, and then respond appropriately in that moment from the heart, and not
Hmm.
always this. If you drop this into the heart, then you will find the right words or the right gestures and the right information to share with that person. So, and that's unique to everybody, of course, as you well know with your experience too.
Yeah. Now, let's talk about the energy that comes along with that, right? I had a friend a couple years ago pose a question to me, and I'm going to pose the same question. She asked, when we enter into these spaces with these individuals, how important is to keep your energy level at a place to where your energy doesn't dictate how the conversation goes.
Mm,
Reason why I ask that is because a lot of times what people don't understand, when you go in and you have a mismatched energy, like your energy waves aren't connecting where they need to be, people pick up on that and they can either go deeper into a depression, which doesn't allow them to grieve properly, but also it doesn't allow them to be able to communicate effectively about what's going on, because then they get into a more victim mindset mentality.
sure.
But if you can go in and your energy is really good and is open, you allow that person to sit you well, that person allows you to sit within that moment with them or several moments with them as they begin to navigate it
Yeah.
and things like that. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's really key, I think, for anyone who's a therapist of any kind, whether it's spiritual work or in the mental health profession as a psychologist and those sorts of things. I mean, even if you're a coach and you're trying to rally your team up and you come onto the field, you've had a bad day, you've had a fight with your partner and you feel like crap, and then you've got a big game on, for example, and then you go into that space of trying to like get the team all riled up to play a really
Hmm.
good game, and you're just like flat, or pumping yourself full of coffee, or faking it to make it, which most of us do a lot of the time. We do put masks on, of course. That's just part of the experience of being human. But
Yeah.
yeah, first, I bring that down, Tony, to personal integrity. And you said at the beginning of your whole introduction here, walking your talk and talking, there's a difference between talking the walk or the talking the talk and actually walking that. So I think maturity and going through, I mentioned the words rites of passage before. Who knows how many of those we'll have in our lives? I know I'm still going through lots of them, and this one now in particular, and there'll be
Yeah.
more. My parents pass, and I'll have to go through that experience, and which will, I'm not looking forward to, but I'm also integrating that as much as I can now, especially through writing about that. So it's not so much of a shock to me as well, because I have an inner standing of what else is going to happen on the other side. So I think when you meet anybody, whether it's just a one-on-one like here today, or you're talking to a group of people, probably especially when you're talking to large groups of people, because, or even teaching a large yoga class, there's 15 to 50 people with all sorts of different stuff going on. You
Hmm.
need to be that one, not to take on their energy, but you need to be the one to set an example without trying to set an example of what being anchored and peaceful and calm and aligned in yourself looks like. And then that resonates from you. So
Mm.
very important that the grounding practices and the self-care, which of course is a huge thing for everybody, really, and especially underneath even the layers of grief and sadness and the things connected to death. A lot of people who are experiencing that, moving through, that death rite of passage themselves now, or witnessing family members or friends doing that too. The self-care, especially when we get into things like cancer, is really important for people to
Ah.
make that they're nurturing and loving themselves as much as they can. And it's hard. I'm not saying this is easy at all, because of course there's, as you know, so many emotions and so much anger and resentment and guilt and blame and shame and all that stuff. So the more that we work on ourselves as someone holding that, what I call sacred space, and you would know this from your working towards being a doula as well, and the space that you hold here on the show, is that the more you are in your sacred light or space or energy, because everything's energy, then
Hmm.
people will match to that unconsciously without even realizing it. And you can hype stuff up and you can get people revved up and they'll go, woo, and they'll get inspired by that. But you also need to know how to, not just go up and down like that, to sort of have these peaks and troughs where you're always tethered yourself. So that's how I work anyway.
No, I love that. I love that because that's a technique that I think a lot of people that get into this field, sometimes it takes a little bit for them to develop, right?
Yep.
And because it has to be a balance within yourself and what you do and how you carry yourself within those parameters, right? I like
Mm,
to call it, a lot of times I tell people it's a paradigm shift within you and everything else around you. And if you let the things outside of you affect what's going on inside of you, it will change the dynamic of how you move, right?
yeah, totally.
And it can burn you out fast if you allow that, you
Mm-hmm.
know? So you have to be very mindful. And I dare say you have to be kind of stingy with your energy and where you direct it towards, right?
Mm,
Especially when you're dealing with your own set of individual griefs or a multitude of grief moments
yep.
as you begin to navigate that world as well, right?
Yeah. Being
And
selective with your energy, I think that's a good point, Tony. And also because everybody's got stuff, whether you've got, whether you're on whatever side of the table, or the therapy table you're on, everybody's got stuff going on in their lives, and everybody's,
mhm,
and you can't tell what people are dealing with just by looking at them, even though most of us do that. We look at someone and we judge them, and I do that myself sometimes, and we're all human as well. So the more that you can work on your own stuff, and then being able to hold that space and witness that space for someone else without being triggered by what they're going through. Because if you empathize, because we all do, or have something that person's going through, you go, oh my gosh, that I remember that, I went through that exact same thing, and you haven't resolved that for yourself, then there's more
Mm.
chance of you, definitely verbally and mentally being not sucked in, but drawn into that drama and dilemma, and maybe not being as clear and as objective as you could be. And then also your
Mm.
energy can get enmeshed and tangled up with the person as well, because you kind, and we do this unconsciously a lot of the time, because there's some part of you that, again, wants to be fixed within yourself, and then you go, oh, I've got to fix that person, so it becomes your responsibility to make sure that person's okay, and then that just causes all sorts of boundary crossing and all sorts of other fun stuff. I've been through all that too. I
Yeah.
don't here as the expert at all. I'm still learning every single day.
I think that's the beautiful part about the work that we do is you have to be a student in it before and you have to be able to switch the roles between student and teacher, and you have to practice discernment as well. Like, okay, in this moment, there's a message that needs to be given to me, and then you have to be patient enough for the time that you need to transfer that message to the person that may come into your world. But
Yep.
now here's the tricky part, and I may be wrong about this, but through my own experience, this is just what I've witnessed, is that sometimes I will get several lessons from grief that I've experienced. And when that storm comes, I know how to sit with it. I know how to sit around and slow it down enough to where it's not so dramatic or dangerous for you, right?
Mm.
Because it's easy to get hit with those things that you are not paying attention to, and you can find yourself in a whirlwind of, oh my God, I'm about to pass out here. So I have learned to slow it down. And what I learned inside of there is that when I slow it down, if I look real carefully, there's the things that are sticking out on the inside that are
Mm.
saying, hey, I push this out. You're going to have to grab it, open it up, take those messages, right? Take that lesson and put it back in. And when you put it back in, it kind of dissipates within the whirlwind of it.
Mm.
Once I extracted information, I could come out of it, and it may be something that I learned 2 weeks ago that a person needs today,
Yep.
right? So you have to really, really be discerned, practice discernment when you're selecting what you need to say, right? Or how you need to show up for those individuals.
Yeah.
Reason why I say that is because everybody requires you to show up in a different way,
Hmm.
right? You can't show up the same way for everyone.
No, of course not. No, and you shouldn't. When you say that, Tony, I think of, there's many layers to grief, which we touched on a little bit earlier, and there's subtle grief that you
Mm,
can be carrying from childhood, which, I sometimes joke and say nobody escapes childhood unscathed. Some people have a really, really rough, horrible childhood. So I'm not making light of that. And other people just have, the usual puberty and traumas and things like that. But they're still at that time, at the age that their psyche was, they feel damaged and they take things on, of course, and they do get traumatized.
mhm,
So there's a whole spectrum of that. And then there can be intense acute grief situations. So,
I know
everything in
that.
between. Um, and I don't have an answer to how to navigate that, or even really how to pinpoint that. That's just something also that's been coming to me. I didn't include it in this book, but I was thinking of it afterwards, because there's usually something else that you think of when you've done a book and you go, oh, I need to put that in or do another part to it. But I think, like trauma, every human on the planet has experienced trauma, certainly in the last couple of years, but throughout our entire life, just because of the way this realm and this society is structured, and
Hmm.
lifetimes and civilizations of ancestral trauma that we're all carrying in various ways through our different lineages as well. So that, while not to diminish that, because I believe that is the key to everything that we experience here, and the one that opens the door to everything that we can help us resolve those things, it's kind of like it just goes on and on in the background, especially if you don't acknowledge it. And then the acute situations that cause, like, car accidents and deaths and murders and suicides and things like that, it's like another
Hmm.
jolt. It strips away another layer of our trust and our belief and our memories in ourselves, as you say, of like, I can deal with this. There's something in me that knows how to work and process with this. I need support, of course, but not looking for the answers outside of ourselves all the time, which we have, again, been conditioned to do. And when I say that, I don't mean outside of ourselves as in, yes, outside of me to my family and my friends and my community and support teams, but not to the hierarchy of external authority type of support systems that actually, in my opinion, disempower a lot of people and then get them into certain practices or institutions that may not nourish their intuitive knowing in themselves that this is a rite of passage again, and that there are lessons, and there is always gold. They can always alchemize their grief into something, like gratitude or beauty or appreciation at some point down the track by going inwards, not just always going outwards and being angry and fighting and having that sort of expression, which again, as you know, is a very important part of grief. It has many shades and many colors within. But I think, I don't know, does that make sense to you? Like just the subtleties that just roll on in the background, then bang, it can be highlighted by other strong, intense ones?
Oh yeah, and it takes a person with a very patient mind and heart to be able to slow those down, to separate them, to actually understand properly what they are. Right? It's
Yeah.
just like you had said something, and that goes right along the lines of anticipatory grief, right? And then when you mentioned earlier, I started thinking about the indigenous tribes, the Aboriginals, and how they're more comfortable with the ritual of celebration
Mm-hmm.
of those things, right? And for me, I often look at the separation between the cultures and things like that, and wonder, and well, not even wonder, I ponder, where did it separate, right?
Mm.
Because I do believe that it should be something celebrated. Because of the energy, we are going to grieve the flesh. But as you mentioned, and this is something really important, the energy doesn't go anywhere. The energy is there. You just transfer out of one body into a different place, right?
Mm.
But not really a different place, because you're everywhere. And I think that's what we all strive to be in that energy form, is to be everywhere that we need to be,
Yeah.
without the bounds of feeling constricted to one general area. But I do think that that energy between understanding those different and vast definitions that we often come across,
Mm.
and not to misinterpret them, right?
Yeah, totally. And I know that your people that listen to you obviously probably have quite a well developed sense and relationship with energy, but a lot of people don't. And I believe
Right.
it's been a deliberate, by deliberate design as well, to disconnect humans from their spiritual self, because we really do operate on 4 planes: physical, mental, emotional, and
Hmm.
spiritual. And for so many civilizations, we've got the physical stuff down pat, and we've got the mental, all the technology and all the thinking things done, and the emotions expressing and all packing away, but just that, everything, emotive, and responding to, marketing, etc., on the emotive level. But the pivotal point in my experience and my belief is the spirit. We are spiritual beings, energetic beings in a human suit having this experience. So
Hmm.
if there are people listening that are just coming to this and are not familiar with that, then it's going to be harder for them to entertain the idea of like, well, I'm just energy, and then when I die, I'm going to go somewhere else, because obviously it's just a physical body, and then it's lights out, for example. So it's tricky with that. And my explanation for that is that, yes, we have lost connection to our Indigenous practices. Again, probably by a lot of deliberate design through external authorities, and also just through different lineages and just things being dissolved and dismissed, etc. So we don't have the relationship with our families quite often. A lot of people don't. Our communities certainly, and certainly not with our dead. So we're not allowed to bury them at home, for example. I'm not saying everyone should go and bury, Uncle Jack in the backyard, but on your properties, for example, or we're not allowed to have are dead in our homes to even die quite often. They get
Hmm.
carted off to a hospital and they die in that clinical setting. And sometimes that's unavoidable, I understand that, but in the majority of cases it's not. When we accept that we don't always have to save everybody, and then we nurture them through that dying process as best as we can. And then we don't get to wash the body and bathe the body and do all those beautiful family things together and like almost have a wake with the person there before they go anywhere near a funeral situation, whether that's being buried or burnt either. So we've been distanced and, it's been compartmentalized for a long time, and
Hmm.
we've been separate
Yes.
from the whole experience. And what happens when we're not educated about stuff? You know this. I mean, everyone gets fearful. No, they fear what they don't understand and what they're not connected to. So I think that's part of a really important aspect of education for people too. Is again, not saying that anyone has to believe that when you leave this body and you go off to another plane or another dimension or whatever, that's your personal preference. But if energy is our breath, for example, and we're all breathing, and that information, that breath is some sort of source of energetic, it's an animated intelligence, and that permeates absolutely everything on the planet, and we're breathing that into our body, then that's an opportunity for every cell in our body to be awakened by that knowledge if we choose to. And the same, so we can use that to live, and then we can also use that to help us when we're on our way out at the other end. So it's a bigger existential question, I realize that, but I think because we're not respectful, majority of, and it is majority of white culture as well, we're not respectful of the indigenous practices and the teachings and the elders and all the beautiful ceremonies, especially here in Australia, where they have a lot of different tribes, of course, but they have ceremonies for sometimes weeks on end. And a lot of tribes don't, they don't speak the name of the deceased again out of respect. And they even move out of the house that the deceased lived in for respect as well, because they don't want to interfere with the spirit when it comes back to visit and do whatever they believe it's going to do. So there's all sorts of
Hmm.
amazing things that are out there if we're open to it. It's not just that, your heart stops beating and you put in the ground, that's the end of you. But unfortunately, a lot of people have become conditioned to believe that that's all that is. And I feel that exacerbates grief for everybody.
Yeah. It does. It does. And I'm glad that you brought that up because I started thinking about something, right? Because a ritual that they do in Africa is it's a grief walk.
Mm,
And you will start over, say for instance, you go to Paris, you hike up in the mountains, you go way up, and then all of a sudden you backpack over um, to one of the tribes over in Africa where they hold these grief rituals,
mm-hmm,
and it's filled with screaming and music and
mm,
movement and things like that. And then once all of that is all done, the people who have lost their loved ones go on what you call a spirit walk, which allows them to reconnect with spirit, right? To not only carry on knowledge, but to carry on the legacy and the stories that they pass upon. It gives them a way of saying, you know, um, thank you for
mm,
allowing me to be a part of this journey with you, right?
yeah,
And then you come back, and of course now it just carries a different meaning. What I've
totally.
noticed, what I notice a lot of times, and it makes me coin this phrase, um, communal connection, when it comes down to connection through spirit and death. No one really understands. A lot of people have shied away from having the conversations behind it. Why do you think that is?
Um, well, it's confronting. First of all, that sounds fantastic. I love that idea of doing the walk. It's like a pilgrimage, and
Yeah.
it's a remembrance of the person or the spiritual energy or entity that was animating that person. Because the person in the
Hmm.
not who that person really was, as you know. Um, yeah, I think that's really beautiful. It's from my own experience. My dad is he's a professor. He's an academic. He's just very intellectual, very intelligent, and has changed a lot, obviously, through his cancer journey. And even in the last couple of decades, just watching me and all the woo-woo stuff that I've been doing, and all my people coming up to him saying, oh, I had a session with your daughter and it was this and that. And so he's been gradually sort of exfoliated his cynicism, I suppose. So he's like, okay, she does some wild stuff. I don't really sort of get it, but I understand that it's working and something's happening, and which is lovely. And he's very proud of me, of course. But for him, straight away, I went into savior mode, and a lot of people will be able to relate to that, of like, I've got to save my dad, and for using all my skills. And that lasted for a couple of months when I tried absolutely everything and it didn't work. And then I realized that I'm actually not here to save him. I'm here to help usher him again through that portal, through that phase as best as I can, to a way that suits him. And he's probably always been an atheist, Tony, in his life. He's always been like, oh, well, it's just, the Big Bang theory. And then also when you die, it's just lights out blackness. Okay. So at my book launch the other week, he came down, and because he wrote the preface in the book, and he spoke to everybody. And because he used to be a lecturer as well, so it was a lovely thing for him to get back on the horse, so to speak. And I nearly fell off my chair, because he said, now through this experience, and partly to the things that I've done, which I'll get to in a moment with him, but also just his own journey of facing his mortality, he said, I no longer see death as an ending, I see it as a transition. And I just sort of went, what? What have you done with my dad? I was just like, wow, I was not expecting that. And I got goosebumps now just remembering it. And of course, I burst into tears on the night. It was just like, wow, that's huge for him to come to his own realization with that. And the process, I got goosebumps through my legs. So when he got his diagnosis and I went through the savior mode and then stopped that, I was like, okay, let's just calm down and let's prepare here now. So let's do your eulogy, Dad. Let's get you mentally and emotionally and physically prepared. We'll worry about the spiritual stuff later, because that's your business, really. And I can help you if you ask me. But let's just get the practical things done, which appealed to his academic mind, of course. So I got him thinking about what to write for his eulogy. And he got right into it. And he's written this beautiful eulogy. And we picked out the songs and we went through all the old photos of him and Mum, and the ones that he'd want. And so now he's very happy. The Virgo in him is very happy that it's going to be done correctly and that nothing's going to be left out. So that was very empowering for him. We had a lot of fun, a lot of tears, a lot of laughter doing that. And now I'm actually moving him into preparing his death plan, like a birth plan, but at the other end. So for him to, write down a list of things, interventions, so to speak, that he is willing to compromise with or receive, because he's designated do not resuscitate for himself. So any decision he makes when it comes to him obviously deteriorating, his condition getting worse and him going into a painful state, then what sort of interventions medically will he be comfortable having that allows him to stay with his intention of DNR? Or if he changes his mind, which I've said to him, it's totally fine. If you change your mind at the last minute and you decide that you want drugs and you want help and whatever, that's okay. But I mean, these are conversations that I never thought I would have with my dad. And they're,
Right.
gut wrenching, but they're coming from love. And it's actually helped all of us deal and process again with our grief incrementally. So I know that, of course, when they do go, it's going to be horrendous, but I don't feel it's going to be as bad because, I know that I've been there through every step with him and honouring everything that he wanted to the best of my ability. And I mean, ultimately, that's all any of us can do in any life situation, isn't it?
It really is. It really is, which leads me to my next question, because I'm watching how you light up, and the smile of being able to participate with your father as he goes through this, but also having him be an intricate part of your life now, right? That a lot of people don't get that, right? A lot of
Yeah.
people never get that. And so now it leads me to a very exciting question. What does it mean to you to have this with him?
Everything. I'm very close to my dad, if you hadn't guessed that already. I love my
I
mum.
know.
Yeah, I love my mum, of course, and I'm very close to my mum. But Dad has. We're definitely from the same soul pool. There's something there. I get my teaching and my writing abilities from him. That's the lineage. He's all about legacy, Tony, and leaving things behind like that. He's written a few books. His book actually just won the best book in Sweden in manufacturing management. So he's very much about community, and he's a
Mm,
giver. Probably as a result of obviously having cancer now, given too much throughout his life, and not a different generation, of course, not being able to really sort of express themselves as much, and also having a little bit more reliance on a medical system that may not always be the best choice for them. So a lot of different belief systems there that I've helped him unpack without trying to tell him that he has to unpack that or helping him. He's done it himself just by being, again, we talked about resonance. When we're in that space within ourselves, then we
Hmm.
radiate something and other people will pick up on that, and that will initiate a process for them as suits them, or they won't, So it's
Hmm.
been very much like that for me. And yeah, I just think, I mean, we've had a lot of loss in our family, and I've always seen my dad. He's been obviously the protector and the provider, the quintessential grandfather who built, billy carts for us and the swings, and bought a farm for us because my sister and I wanted horses and all those things. So it's an absolute privilege for me to walk this path with him. And as I said before, there are some beautiful moments, obviously, every day that we do get to share, and everything's great. And there are other days where I hit exhaustion and I get frustrated, and I'm human, and I get pissed off with people and with him, and he gets short and cranky, and we have those moments. But because the lines of communication are so open now, it's like we just get over it in like 2 seconds flat, because every moment is precious now. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't believe in death sentences, when the doctor says you've got 6 months to live, or this is your last Christmas, or whatever. I don't like that languaging at all. I feel that,
Hmm.
every human's higher self knows when they're going to go. And, we could get hit by a bus today. Nobody really knows. So there's no point in really sort of going, okay, I've got to do this because I'm going to die on, this June or whatever with that. I think
Hmm.
being present in every moment, it's made us more present with one another, and also more accepting, because even after doing that whole round of, trying to get him onto every single tonic and supplement, and to all of my shamanic teachers, he just wants to live out however long he has now in comfort, and eat what he wants, and be happy, and do the things or not do things as he feels to each day. So it's a big learning curve for me just now to really step back again and hold that bigger space, and just
Hmm.
allow him to do him, however that looks each day. So yeah, I'm very fortunate, and it is, and I'm very lucky to have this experience. And if anybody listening and watching, if you do have an opportunity to go through this with either or both of your parents, I would highly suggest that you do, move some things around so it can be possible. I know it may not always be possible, but, and maybe you may not, people don't have relationships with their families, of course, but I think at, at this point, they say births, deaths, and marriages bring families together and
Hmm.
communities together. This is one of the most crucial points in our history as humans, as a collective as well. So I think the more
Hmm.
crap that we can let go of, and the more resentment and guilt and trauma, especially with those within reason. Obviously, you don't want to put yourself in a harmful physical situation, but with those people who have, have wounded us, and that we've had traumatizing experiences with, again, individual situations. But if the more that you can make peace with that and forgive those experiences and transform them before that person or you pass, I think that's really beneficial for the greater collective energy. And that might be the very thing that actually tips us over that, from that tipping point of like, oh, finally humanity gets that we've got to bring in that spiritual component that I mentioned before:
Right.
mental, physical, mental, and emotional. We're spirits, all of that. And then
Yeah.
it opens up so much potential. So yeah, I hope that
It,
answers
it
the question.
it does, and I want to add to that, right? Because there's another component that I think is very vital, and you've said it a few times. It's the social construct that comes along with that, right? Being
Mm,
in community, and it leads me to the phrase where I'm a huge advocate of this as well, especially someone who has experienced multiple losses
mm,
across the board, from parents to child to sibling to multiple friends, and the different variations of what that looked like as well, from homicides to natural deaths to overdoses to unaliving themselves. So when you belong to these social constructs, I often suggest to people, find your tribe, right?
mm,
Find people who can relate to what you're going through. This will allow you to have a more open dialect around what does it look like for you.
Mm,
Like, and these individuals will understand that they're not here to fix you, right?
mm,
They're just here to support you while you kind of navigate it and kind of figure things out. Because what works for one person is not going to work for the next, right?
mm,
And you have to find what works for you and not pay attention to the phrase, "Oh, you're doing it wrong," right?
mm, mm,
And you know, because this would take away, say for instance, if someone was to come to you, Denby, and go, "Oh man, yeah, I see what you're doing with your dad and your mom and everything, and you're doing it wrong," you would probably look at them and go, "No, I'm doing it the way I need to," right? But how many people fall victim to that statement? "Oh, you're doing it wrong," and then they take away, or they begin to not trust themselves to
mm.
do what is necessary in order to have that spiritual connection and experience. They don't
Yeah.
realize this is part of the story, you know. And of course, like yourself, I may just see more in the spiritual aspect of around death, right? And my perception of death is just waiting there to walk us home. And it's and I for me, a
Mm,
lot of times, you know, when I see people smile when death shows up, I kind of imagine death coming and saying, "Hey, I want to hear all about your life. You
mm.
could tell me as I walk you home," right? And to me, that's the journey that we are striving to do because our stories live on, but death gets the one thing that it never gets to experience. It gets to hear about our human experience
Yeah.
here, right?
Yeah.
And I
That's
think it's exciting.
mm, yeah. It's and that might sound like really weird to some people, but I totally get it, Tony. And when you say, I mean, if someone wants to come up to me and say that you're doing everything wrong, I'd be like, well, thank you. That's your perspective. Would you like a cup of tea? I think you might need a stiff drink and someone to listen to you because, you know, if this, in my experience and my own personal experience of looking at myself and some of the crazy stuff that I used to believe and think and that I still sometimes comes up that I go, oh yeah, I remember that. Now the ego self is that when, and we have all been vulnerable to this because it's been, again, some sort of other cultural dynamic, is that when we surrender our authority to an external authority, and we do it like from very young ages. Obviously, main first authorities are our parents, and for most children, the father, and then the principal at the school, and then your boss. And then we transfer that sense of identity and authority and the person to listen to the doctor, and then to the politicians, and then to the government, etc., and all those sorts of dynamics. So when you farm out your sovereignty to external authorities, you lose connection to your inner authority. And that inner
Mm,
authority knows everything. I believe it's in your cells. It's just an experience needs to happen that activates that. And you need to be, again, as calm and as clear and as present and as healthy as well. If you're feeding yourself with alcohol and drugs and fast food and stuff like that, your system's trying to process that to keep you alive. So you're not going to have any energy or consciousness to do that type of inner work. Yeah. And we see these epidemics across the planet all the time, don't we?
mm.
And
Yes, we do.
a lot of people, through no fault of their own, are being externally manipulated. And then so the belief that there's an external authority that says, no, that's wrong and that's right and this is good and this is bad. Evil's a different story, but we won't get into that. Then people don't have any chance of going, who's in here? Who's this inner child who knows everything and that is carrying all the wisdom keys and all that knowledge and information, as you mentioned there, that is right for you in your situation, in your family unit, in regards to the constellation of your family and all the relationships that are going on in there and the layers and all the contracts and agreements and all sorts of things. So yeah, I tend to not, I used to attract a lot of people like that, but that was a phase of my life where I needed people to come in and challenge
Mm,
and make me start thinking, oh well, where am I doing that? Where am I saying to people, well, that's wrong, you've got to do it this way? And no, and maybe just maturing and getting older too, learning how just to step back and just be that witness. That's the hardest thing, as you would know, Tony, to sit back and witness what people do to themselves and
mm,
one another, and not jump in and try and fix that, but to hold a sacred, loving, neutral, compassionate space for all those experiences that are necessary for all of those people's growth. Yeah,
Yes, yes.
and
Oh
death
my
is
God. I'm,
yeah.
yeah,
That's
I'm
another
glad that
conversation
you said
altogether.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, because I'm right there with you, right? I loved it. Like, I often tell people this, like, whenever you see someone about to hit their version of rock bottom, stop taking away the shovel, please. And they're like, but I can't. I know you can't.
mm,
And that's the hardest part is watching a loved one, someone that you care about, go through what they're going through right now. But if you stop this, they're going to miss a very vital part.
yeah,
And they go, what? You're going to miss the part where they ask you for help.
mm,
And people are going, well, no, no, no. Think about it for a minute. You got to where you got to because you hit your version of rock bottom and you came out of it and you had to ask for help. See, when a person feels as if they have nowhere else to go,
mm,
then they submit and they let go their pride and they let go their ego and they begin to slowly ask you for help in their own way. You
yeah,
have to be prepared for that,
mm,
right? But
mm,
don't stop the process. Allow them to go to it because for one, just like and other people out here who are listening right now, it makes for a hell of a story for someone else to grab down to and go, if Tony and Denby can do it, I know I can do it too. Because now we've become examples. We've
mm,
become something that people can hold on to encourage them to ask for that help.
yeah, yeah. It's a really important piece. It's probably the most pivotal piece in
Right.
the self mastery journey, if you want to call it that. Just this journey of bringing back all the pieces of ourselves that we've lost and forgotten and abused and disrespected and bargained with, etc. And I think a qigong master friend of mine, Tony, told me many years ago, and it was one of the things that really changed my perspective as as a green therapist. um, and I was and a lot of people listening to this and yourself, we as healers, as therapists, overgiving and trying to fix people is just that's what we a lot of us tend to do. And
Mhm.
again, stepping crossing boundaries and things, which is another lesson you have to learn. But he at that time, I think I was trying to, I had a couple of clients. I was just starting out, and I was just immersed in everything, like just 24/7 trying to like research and think about all these things that could help them, and just had their best intentions at heart, and hadn't reached my first burnout point because I've had a few burnout points in my life because of this pattern that I've now cleared. And he said to me, hang on, what if the best thing is for you to just step back and just witness? How do you know that you, or how do you not know that you stepping back and not doing anything is actually the exact catalyst that this person, we just call him John actually needs to initiate his own process
Yeah.
and his own power? Words, I'm paraphrasing, but words to that effect. And I just sort of was like, whoa, okay. It really landed for me of like, maybe the best thing in some moments, not all of them, was actually just to step back and just not let him flounder, but just let him feel and let him connect with all those little intuitive parts of himself as they came alive. And
Hmm.
so I could do other things like, which I did, do yoga and do breathing and things like that, which would get that life force moving through, as I mentioned
Right.
before, with all that intelligence. And then once it's coursing through his veins and his nadis and his auric field, then that's up to him how that all expresses itself. So all I
Right.
can do is maybe initiate that and then sit back and then hold that with love, and to be there, not to abandon anybody. But it was a pivotal point for me to not go in there and hold his hand and other clients' hands and do the work for them, because we can't save anybody.
Right.
Do the work for them, and we can't grieve anybody's grief for them. We can cry and we can empathize and we can be there and support them and nurture them through that, but it's none of our business really when it really comes down to it. Their patterning and their story with that. It's an important piece.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that you said that because it's like a copyright, their own little copyright for their blueprint of how to navigate that world.
Mm,
And I love the fact, and I want to just go back just for a little bit when you were speaking about, the physical, mental, emotional, as well as the spiritual, how we live. And I want to add to it if that's okay, right?
Okay.
Because I think there's for me, and you can give me your thoughts on this, but I also think there's three other levels that once we can pretty much learn how to navigate the first four, there's the other three that we have to learn how to navigate as well, depending on what you want to do with it, which is the subconscious, the conscious, and the unconscious mind, the unconscious thought. Speaking of spirit, right? One, well, two of them have limits, right? These are the physical limits or the laws of physics that bind us to those limits. And don't, as wonderful as they are, it's full of knowledge, it's full of energy, it's full of understanding. Now, the unconscious mind is so very vast that if you have to allow yourself to be open minded to allow spirit, and again, I only speak from my own experiences. To allow the spirit to navigate through dimensions, to connect with those things that maybe people don't never teach us.
Mm.
So say for instance, for me, this is hard for me to talk about because it sounds kind of crazy, but it makes sense to me. There's a such thing for me as shadow people, and what I mean is that I often see the emergence between the dimensions of people that have passed away, and it's like a mirror image, right? So, say for instance, you may be at home and you open up a cabinet and you go walk somewhere, come back and that cabinet is closed. What if somebody's on the other side going, who left the cabinet open, but you can't hear them, right? But they're experiencing the physical opening up and the closing of the cabinets. And I have to crack myself up when I say this. I wonder if we're the ghost in their dimension,
Who
so to
knows?
speak. So,
Yeah.
but again, these things do happen, right? These things do happen, and people will say, "Oh, that's unexplained," or you have people who have been chasing ghosts their whole entire lives and pick up conversations that they from people who are not there. And I'm going, well, what if they are there and you just can't see them with the naked eye? But if you're able to adjust your energy just right, there's a shift, there's a merger that is flip flopped on us, right? Like there's a mirror image, but we're just different people on
Yeah.
the other side. So that is something that I've always explored, and things like that. And I tell you, it's such a great thought to have to go. What if we're the ghost in someone else's dimension, right? And we're just messing with them, and they come around and start messing with us. Wouldn't that just be hilarious, right?
It's good dinner conversation, that's for sure. You certainly get the party started with that, Tony. I'm,
But you
I'm,
gotta be.
I'm totally with you on that. Like, I had a client say to me the other day, she started talking and saying the story, and she goes, "Oh, it might sound a bit too weird." Then she looked at me, and I just went, and she went, "Oh no, there's nothing too weird that anyone can share with me that I'm going to." I'm point of that. So it was kind of funny, but yeah, I mean, all of that is possible, and I think a big part of the reason actually, is why I have such um, knowing and confidence in myself and what I offer, because we're all different, in regards to the death container and the
Mhm.
medicine that I carry. I mentioned before, and the rituals and the ceremonies that come through me and that I've developed and then I've chosen to embody in this lifetime, whatever your wording around that, is because I have had so many experiences with souls on the other side. And I mean, we
Mm,
won't go into the whole reincarnation, illusion, all that sort of stuff. It's a whole different topic altogether as to what there are forces that are manipulating those things, and there are all sorts of different imprints and layers of reality within the
mm,
subconscious and the conscious mind and the unconscious and the Wetiko, which I'm sure, or the Wetiko, some people pronounce it, the mind virus, the Native American Indian practice, or rather, not a practice, it's just the word they give to the mind virus that insinuates humanity's consciousness. So there's all that going on. But even just from, if that's too much, if that's too woo for people, just the 3D perspective of like, we only see a tiny fraction of light, and we only use
mhm,
a small percentage of our brain. So there's so much more out there that we're not seeing and sensing and able to perceive yet. So the possibility that there's somebody else looking at you through the cupboard is highly likely, especially when so many people have had near-death experiences. And I mean,
Mm.
one of the first, I'll just tell a little story if I may. One of the first amazing experiences I had actually was when if you hear snoring, it's not me, it's the my dog on the floor. Okay.
That's
My
okay. That's okay.
Yeah, he's making noises on the floor. So my other staffy that I had a studio here where I live, and he died probably about 9 years ago. And literally the week after he died, and the vet came to our house. We put him to sleep in the garden. I buried him in the garden. I did a ritual and a ceremony. It was already beautiful. My son's first experience of death at the age of 7, so that was really important that it was a beautiful experience, that he was involved.
Mhm.
He processed that really well. Anyway, the week after, I'm sitting in the studio and I'm teaching, and I've just got everybody lying down on the floor, like in Shavasana at the end, just lying down, getting ready to rest. And I literally, and my dog's name was Buddha, and he was a big solid staffy, and he would always sit right next to me on my mat when I was teaching, and then he'd roll over and snore and all that sort of stuff. It was hilarious. Everyone loved him. There goes the snore. And I literally felt him come and sit next to me, and I felt his body sit against me and then just slide down the side of me, plop on the floor like he usually did physically. I felt him energetically do that while I was
Mhm.
speaking and teaching. And all my students saw my face, because I burst into I didn't burst into tears, but the tears just started. I went, and they saw my body move like I would have if he had physically been there, because he was heavy, like 30 kilos. And I sort of did that, and they looked at me, and then they saw the tears, and I just went, Buddha is here. And they all burst into tears, of course, because they knew him and they loved him as well. And so I've had a lot of those experiences. Another one with my horse as well, after he passed, and I was doing a ceremony for him, and he came up behind and he nuzzled my neck and did that horsey noise.
I love it.
And it was just bizarre. So I think if people have had those sorts of experiences, or they've had dreamscapes that have been really real for them, and or vision, other sorts of spiritual connections, that helps us comprehend and grasp that there is so much more than just this short life that we really have from birth to whatever
Right.
we get to. So that, I just wanted to put that in too, because the subconscious, the conscious, and the unconscious mind, definitely. But the Watiko is really interesting to look into if people haven't before, because there's a whole lot of manipulation going on that mental realm to keep us stuck and to keep us in those lower 3 dimensions, and not in that expanded
Mm.
light, super conscious, eternal, immortal, invincible source, God, light, whatever you want to call that experience, which is, I believe, that's what we are at our core.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. And you wrote a book. You got a copy of a book that you can show people?
I do. Dying to Live. Oh, can you see that there?
I can see it. I can see it. Wow, that is beautiful. That is beautiful. Now, tell people about your book.
It's only small. It's 200 and it's an easy read. It's 200 and not even that, actually. 186 pages. So you can read it literally in a day, a couple of days. Short, succinct, easy to read chapters. And it started off as a journal. For example, on the back here, I've got, what if death wasn't the end of your life but another beginning? Would you want to know how to best prepare yourself for the unknown? And what if embracing death had the potential to enhance the way you love and live? So those are the questions on the back of it, which is that. And it started off as a journal for me to process, when we heard about Dad's cancer diagnosis, because I'm a writer, I was just like, it all was just coming out. And then
Right.
memories came of like all the different times, all the different types of deaths, like yourself. You've experienced a lot more than me, unfortunately, in my life, of what I've had in my family and friends and community circles, the different types of deaths. So I talk about suicide, I talk about stillbirth, I talk about my own abortions, I talk about murder in the family, I talk about suicide, and I go into dementia, near-death experiences, a lot of practical 3D types of things. And then also it just evolved from that, natural death as well. Euthanasia, I talk about postnatal depression. And then it sort of morphed into the death of light through things like ritual abuse,
Hmm.
sorts of things. I don't know if we're allowed to say that word on YouTube, but yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Or we just don't want to get censored. The death of friendships, perimenopause as well, the death of an aspect of yourself that births into a new phase of life for the feminine.
Hmm.
Dying, how to die well. I talk about remission. I've had experiences with that with cancer. The death of a species, the transformation of humanity, the,
Yeah,
uh, the death of the masculine and the divine masculine and divine feminine, as far as a lot of gender surgeries go. A lot of things that the feedback I've had, Tony, has been that people hadn't sort of gone, oh, wow, yeah, that is actually an experience of death, a concept of death. So it just kind of organic. Once I started writing, it actually just came through. I wrote this in about 3 months. And then I, 3 or 4 months, and then popped it out there, self published it, and so very cathartic. And Dad wrote the preface, and he's edited and read the whole thing, and given his approval as well, especially with family stories. And I have a few other friends who have shared their stories specific to certain experiences, which has been such a privilege as well. Just to show that how things can be transmuted again, and that death is not always, it's not final the way that a lot of us see it.
yeah.
And you know the beautiful things that can come out of these experiences if we allow them. And yeah, so that's basically what it is: learning to live and love in death, and then supporting ourselves and our loved ones through the actual end of right to the end.
I love that. I love that. And now they have, because that's fascinating. How can people find it? Amazon or
It's on Amazon, yep. Dying to Live by Denby Sheather on Amazon at the moment. I'm just working on getting it on as an ebook as well, but you can just buy the paperback. It's 22 Australian dollars, so I've kept it at a really nice, affordable price. So it would be wonderful if people could support me and purchase it.
oh,
Thank you.
every people, everyone who's listening, her information is in the YouTube channel. Go there, support her. If you love the topics that she put in the book, you're definitely going to love the book. You guys already heard her. She's very knowledgeable, amazing, fascinating woman, and definitely is worth going and checking out. Right.
Thanks,
So
Tony.
now, how can people find you?
Through that, and also through my website, which is dembysheather.com at the moment. Yeah, I've also got a Substack, which is just Denby at Substack, or Substack/Denby. I'll send you the links there. And
Okay.
I do a newsletter most weeks as well. And I talk about everything there, not just on the death thing. But yeah, I've got a few programs and courses that I'm just putting together now, which will be up on the website, that people will be able to purchase and sort of explore and dip their toe in, just for a little entry into some practices that can help them,
Hmm.
as well as learning how to live. And it's not just about, in this process, okay, well, we're all going to die at some point physically. So learning to live fully as best as we can, until that point. I cover that as well.
Yes, I definitely appreciate that. Now, so my last question to you before as we begin to wrap this up, if you had a superpower, what would it be?
I think love is the ultimate superpower for everybody, but I think mine in particular is being able to heal with the words that I write. I still do physical healing on people, of course, but I feel that the way that I express and the way that I write carries a certain resonance and frequency, and that's one of my main gifts. Yeah. So if you want to call it superpower, I think we're all super.
I think we are too. I think we are too. Now, Denby, I want to say, as we wrap this episode up, I want to say thank you for taking the time out and coming in and having this conversation with me today. Love hearing your perspective and sharing your knowledge with me and everything else, as well as with the audience, and for everyone who has been tuning in on all the social media channels. I see you guys out there. Do me a favor, go and support Denby and grab her book. Let her know that Tony sent you. Go check out her work. If you're looking for support, resources, and things like that, please go check her out. For everyone else, if this is your first time tuning in and you enjoy the conversations, support the channel, subscribe to it, hit that bell notification, but most importantly, share with others that you think can benefit from the conversations that we have. For everyone else, guys, we're going to wrap this one up. I have another one coming up in like another 15 minutes. So you guys stay tuned for that one as well. And guys, thank you for allowing me to keep bringing these conversations with to you guys and sharing other people's journeys with you guys as well. So with that being said, guys, we're going to close this one out. See you guys in the next one. Have an amazing day.
Thanks,
Peace.
Tony. Thank you.
You're welcome.